as a principal consultant, what I do is I actually lead the transformations for leading Agile. And one of the things that I've found is that when we don't put a good metrics package in place, when we don't build a good business case ahead of time, that's usually when we have problems going into the transformation. So really the key is when we talk about doing an Agile transformation, it's never about being Agile, right? It's really about reaching business outcomes. And so we need to get, when we have these conversations where we're saying, hey, you know, the business isn't involved. We're doing this Agile transformation and it's all about IT. Well, of course it is. If we come in and we say, hey, look, we're going to transform these teams and we don't engage them in some sort of a business conversation, right? What's in it for them? When they understand that, when they start to not treat IT like they're a customer of IT and it starts becoming a partnership, it's because they can start to see the value and why they should get involved, right? And so these are the kind of things we want to talk about. What I want to talk about as we go through are what are some of the things that we can do to help them measure it, right? So when we talk about business agility, we're talking about organizations that are able to renew themselves, right? Because when we start to go through this Agile transformation, we end up having to change our operating model, right? It's important to eventually, at the beginning, a lot of times what we do is we change the roles, we're doing a lot of matrix organization stuff, but eventually you have to make some sort of a commitment to building your organization so it's very agile so that you can adapt to the market, right? Now, the interesting thing is when you talk about Agile, it seems like this crazy thing. It's like, well, don't worry about it. Just tell me what you want, and eventually it'll come to you, and it'll be fine. And so the environment feels very unstable. And really, when you're talking about scaled, the stability is really what's important when you that enables Agile, right? You really can't be Agile at scale unless you're stable. And the way you build that stability into the organization is through structure, governance, and metrics. Right? And by doing that, what you do is, by doing that, you allow your organization to make changes inside of a place that's safe for everybody in the organization, right? So as you're getting competing requirements coming in, you have a method to have a conversation about how you want to do that and what do you want to do going forward. So when we talk about business value, what I'm going to do is, in some cases, we're going to talk about the financials and how can we financially measure things. But then there are other things that we want to measure that may not be directly linked to something financial. It may be more how we're flowing work through the system. And that's as important as the financial gains, right? Because that's what shows us that we have a healthy organization. So again, when we talk about the measures, there are short-term measures that we're going to do. I'm going to go through and I want to talk about how we can determine business outcomes, and then we're going to go through how we can come up with a business case for how we're going to do Agile, and it'll lead into what Stefan's going to talk about, some of the work that we did at Green Sky. But in general, again, what we talk about is if we're not going after business value, then agility doesn't really matter, right? So if we have business value first and agility, that's what we're starting to talk about when we talk about business agility. So this is really more than IT, right? It's not just software development organizations, right? Like if you look around the room, you got banking, manufacturing, financial, and one of the things that we've seen is that what they all have in common is that we're putting agile processes in place, methodologies that help them change and move in a manner that is consistent with what the business goals are, but allowing them to be able to change and move on the fly, right? So for example, my son's in the Army, he's a cryptolinguist, right? So what these guys do is they teach them language and cryptology, right? And so in a good case, they're sitting in front of a screen, they're looking at websites and they're trying to determine, they're looking for ciphers and things like that. And he says to me, hey, I got lucky, I'm getting deployed. And I'm like, really? I thought the lucky people were the ones sitting in front of the internet looking for scripts and things like that. So anyhow, so he gets deployed, and what they do with the guys that know language is they put them on the radio, right? So they're out and they're getting deployed, and they have a very firm goal, right? It's get point A to point B. And so they go on, and they're about a mile into their journey. They have 2 miles left. They start hearing gunfire, and it sounds like it's coming to the left, from the left. So they all dive into a building, and they're there, and you can imagine, right? There's gunfire going on. They're trying to figure out what to do. They're yelling at each other, and their platoon leader is like, we're going to head right and get away from the gunfire and regroup. And so Tyler's on the radio, and one of the things they teach these guys is how to triangulate sound. So this is Tyler's first deployment, and he's looking at the numbers, and he's doing it twice, he's doing it a third time, and he's convinced that the gunfire is actually coming from the right, not from the left, that it's bouncing off the buildings. So the platoon leader gets up, and they're going to start running to the right, and Tyler stops them. And he said, sir, stop. Yeah, everybody's got to stop. We need to go left. We need to go left. And so they're like, no, we're not going left. We're going to go right. I know what I'm doing. And Tyler said, sir, I know what I'm doing. We need to go left. And so they looked at him, and they said, are you sure, Mr. Bradley? Like, sure. Wasn't exactly what he called him at the time. But so sure enough, I wouldn't be telling this story if they didn't go left and everything was fine, right? So what do we learn from that story? Besides my son's a serious badass. I mean, so what we learn from that story is that, think about the Army, right? Very structured. There's a governance model in place that explains to you how you're allowed to make decisions, right? They have measurements, mostly, I'm not exactly sure what they are, but I think win the war and don't get shot are two good measures, right? And so if we put those structures in place, that's what we're trying to do in an agile organization, right? What are the measures that we can put in place? How do we put the guardrails in place and help the organization move in the direction we want it to move? We can't make every decision as business leaders. And if we do, all we're gonna do is slow down the organization, right? So when we start talking about business agility and being enterprise-wide, there are a lot of things like agile strategy to execution, right? This is what we're talking about from the very point of an idea. How long does it take us to take that idea and to execute on it? Get it into the hands of our customers, right? We need adaptive portfolio management, right? How do we look at the money that we're spending and bringing it into the organization? If we're still doing all of our planning up front at the beginning of the year, that we might want to take a look at that, right? Because our markets aren't static, right? If they were static, that yearly planning would be fine, right? But we need to do things that allow us to innovate without tearing down our current organization. So when we talk about identifying our business value end to end, you want the ability to identify the activities that are really the most valuable, right? So how do you start to do that? So one of the things that you want to do is when you're talking about your business outcomes or your business ideas, you want to talk about them in terms of outcomes, right? So for example, if I own like an air purifying company, I might walk into the board one day and I'm talking about, I want to increase revenue for the air purifier, right? Sounds like a good goal, right? You know, you can kind of measure that. But a better goal might be, I want to increase revenue 10% quarter over quarter, right? So now what can happen is your team can do some analysis against that and go, how can I actually execute against that outcome? Well, you go down, you talk to the team, and you figure out that, hey, we're closing about 1 in every 10 deals. So if I could close 1 in every 8 deals, that's going to get me around 8%, kind of close, maybe not all the way there yet. And so you go back and you talk to your salesperson and say, why can't I close those deals? Say, well, our customers don't believe they have an air quality problem. So developers like in the room, and he said, hey, I can create an app that can show you air quality. So you can take it inside and then show the air quality of our purifier. Everybody will buy it. And they're like, that's a great idea, let's do that. How long will it take to build that app? 2 months. It's like, well, wait a minute. We have to do quarter over quarter, 10% every quarter, starting now. So if it takes you 2 months to build this application, you know, it's kind of risky, right? Are we going to make this quarter, right? And so what happens then is somebody in the room gets smart and says, wait a second, what if we don't build the app yet? What if we just take and do an air quality report, hand it to a couple of salespeople, and see if that helps us close more deals, right? So somebody does that. They hand it out, they go, and they actually close a couple deals that way, right? So now what's happened is you're starting to de-risk the environment, right? You're starting to de-risk and move towards the outcome that you're trying to get to. In the old environment where we had a year, people would just arbitrarily start building apps, hoping that we would get the outcome that we wanted, right? So as business leaders, the more clear we can be with the outcome and the constraints, because I'd argue that the constraint of using paper instead might not have come to somebody if they didn't have that time constraint, right? So as leaders, what we need to do is we need to use business outcomes to help people understand and to guide them in the direction that we want them to go, right? Let them make their decisions at the team level as long as they're following the organizational goals. So now what I want to talk about is let's make a case for going to Agile, right? So when we do our 2-day workshops, we usually get executives in the room and we'll go through and we'll talk about these 6 business goals, right? Predictability, quality, cost savings, and then we go through and the interesting thing is that I don't know why I'm surprised about this almost every time, but we'll go in and I always expect to hear early ROI and cost savings. Almost 85, 90% of the time we hear predictability and quality, right? So the interesting thing with that is, to me, that's a good sign, because once I can get predictable and I'm building good quality stuff, then I can move and I'm a little bit more agile, right? Now, one of the things when we do this business case is that your transformation is going to look completely different if you're going after product fit and innovation as opposed to predictability and quality, right? So these are things that when we go through them, actually using a lot of industry standard metrics, like for predictability and quality, we can actually build a pretty good business case and based on cost savings and where you want to go with your organization, with a business case built on these values. That's some of the stuff that Stefan will touch on when he does his experience report afterwards. So really what we want to do is that the companies that are looking at their non-financial measures, in addition to their financial measures, that's really what we want to see, right? Because what will happen is that when you look at, like let's say profit versus profitability, right? Profit is really just what you make minus what it costs you, what your expenses were. But profitability is going to start to look at the flow of value across the organization, right? So how fast can I take an idea from ideation to implementation? Right? What can I do to shorten that cycle? A lot of times what we've seen in organizations is understanding what not to do as much as what to do, right? Like a number of times you'll see that we have initiatives that we started from the organization, and when you start to break them down into epics and value delivery type of things, you start to look at what's getting injected off to the side, and you can't actually tie that back up to a business initiative. So I'm not saying those are necessarily bad. Maybe there was something that wasn't in the initiative, but those are the type of things when we see those as business leaders in the organization, we have to figure out where they're coming from and why, right? Can we stop doing something that we keep doing? Do we need to add something? Is there an initiative that we're not funding that's coming in from the side that the organization knows, but for some reason it's not getting back to the leadership team? So we want to use those type of measures to understand where we're going with those things. Cost reduction, you go to your CFO with cost reduction, they get all excited. Sometimes what you'll see is that it's a tough call to call it cost reduction, but when you get your teams more efficient, they're building better quality things. And when I talk about quality, I don't just mean that the delivery system and the developers are building better quality software, but the quality of the requirements are coming down or better. They're clear, articulated goals. There's something they can measure. They have acceptance criteria, and it can start out with those outcome-based goals that you want to get to. But when those things exist, that's high quality requirement, and it goes into high quality delivery. So what ends up happening is what you'll see again when we're working with Green Sky and a couple of others is that with the same number of people, you can now start to deliver more valuable stuff. So like if you were able to deliver 100 units with $16 million worth of resources, you can now deliver 150 units of value, right? So it could be looked at a cost reduction, but typically what happens is you just feed more work into that system. You don't typically take those employees out. So one of the other metrics that I think is important to measure is that that's more of a soft measure is employee satisfaction. right? When in the environments that we work in, having knowledge workers that are happy do better work, right? They collaborate more, they feel engaged, they're actually taking information back to you, they're thinking about these problems and they're bringing them back up through the organization. And you'll see that in the satisfaction, employee satisfaction surveys. You know, it's always interesting at the very beginning of Agile, they always go up, right? Because everybody's listening to them and talking to them. And then there's a period of time where it starts to stagnate and kind of fall apart a little bit. And that's usually when we've kind of done a transformation but didn't really focus it on the business, right? We've kind of done a transformation. IT feels better. They feel like they're being listened to, but we still don't have the business engaged. So what you'll see is the employee satisfaction start to go up, then it'll sit, and then it'll start to drift back down again. Predictability is very easy to measure from an Agile standpoint. I mean, you know, if you think about it, I used to say this, and people used to give me a hard time, but to me, Agile teams never miss a date, right? If you're building in iterations and you're working your requirements so they fit, and you deliver when you're ready to deliver on a cadence, right? So the question is that what does predictability really mean, right? So again, if you tie it back to the outcomes and the measure, predictability is if I say that I'm going to reach a certain percentage, how close can I get there and how fast can I do that, right? And it's okay to change. It's okay to change those outcomes. Like, so in my initial example, we just talked about one, right? There could be air filters that you could sell that could help get you to your 10%. There could be other items in there. There could be service items that could be added to that. So what you want to do is you go through and build that outcome list with some impact mapping or whatever it is, and you build that into the system, and then the system becomes more predictable from a business standpoint. So really, the idea is that you can take a very measured approach to your transformation. Business agility doesn't mean that things are chaotic, right? You measure, you set the goals, you build a governance model, and then you run the model. And then you iterate over and over, right? Our Agile transformations are never done, right? Thank you. That was faster than I thought it was going to go.